Are you going to start with? Okay. Would you? That'd be great. Oh. The Seder. Which page is that, Danny?
Sorry?
What page?
147.
147, that's what I thought. And then the TV is just on a timer, right? It just turns on, as far as we know. Let's hope. All right, well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see some of you here. We appreciate it. You allow us the chance to have a minyan on second day Sukkot, so thank you. And we'll have a chance to go in the Sukkah after services today and do Kiddush and Hamotzi. And we're going to begin on the top of page 147 as Rabbi Horowitz leads us to the beginning of the Shacharit service.
Hail b'tatzumot zecha hagadol b'chvod shemecha hagibor lanetzach v'hanara b'nodotecha HaMelech HaYoshev Al Kisei Ram V'Nisa Shochen Ad Maram V'Kadosh Shemo V'Chatuv Rananu Tzadikim Adonai Layesharim Navatehila Befi Yesharim Titalal Uvedivrei Tzadikim Titparach Uvelashon Chasidim Titramam V'Karev Kedoshim Titkadash Uvmakalot Rivavot Amachabed Yisrael Al Kol Divrei Shirot V'Tishbachot David ben Yishai Avdecha Meshichecha Yishtabach Shimcha Lad Malkeinu Barachot v'hodot mi'ata v'yad olam baruch atah Adonai El melech gadol b'tishbachot El hodot Adonai niflot Abocher b'shirei zimra Melech elchei ha'olamim Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah
Please rise.
V'yomad yivrach v'tev malchutei Chaye konu v'yomei konu v'chaye kobed Yisrael Bagalav Izman Kariv Yimru Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbam V'rach Nigalam Amei Almaya Yidbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpar V'damam V'yitnasei V'yithadar V'yitale V'yitalal Shmei Dekudesha B'richu V'yela Min Kol Birchata V'shivata Tushbachata V'nechemata Damiran b'yalma v'yimeru. Amen. Baruchu et Adonai hamavorach. Baruch Adonai hamavorach li'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Yotzeru v'rechoshech oseh shalom. Uvorei et hakol.
You may be seated, page 152.
Hameir la'aretz v'doim rebarach hamim tu chadesh kuyim ma'aseh v'reishit ma'aseh kodai kadam chacham ma'aseh v'retzki. Kulam avim, kulam beruim, kulam giborim, kulam osim b'yemav yiraret zon konam, v'kulam potchem et piyam b'kedusha u'torah, b'shira u'zimra, u'mvarchim u'mshabchim u'mfarim, u'maritzim u'makdishim u'mamlichim, et shem ha'el ha'melech ha'gadol ha'gibor v'nara kadoshu, v'kulam mekablim aleim, Ol malchut shamayim ze mizeh, v'notnim reshut ze lazeh, lakdish liyotzram menachat ruach, safav rivavnim akadosha, kulam ke'echad anim yamarim b'yirah. Kadosh, kadosh, kadosh Adonai tzavot, malach ha'aretz kevodo, v'ha'ofanim v'chayot ha'kodesh, parash kadom minasim liyamat serafim, Limatam Shabachim B'Yomrim Baruch Kavod Adonai Mim Kamol V'Titeinu Or Chadash HaTzion Ta'ir V'Nizkach Ulanam Heira Lioro Baruch Atah Adonai Yotzer HaMa'orot Hava Rabbatanu Adonai Eloheinu V'avienu l'shalom me'ar ba'kanfot ha'aretz v'tolichenu kol mamiyut li'artzeinu ki el pa'el Yeshuat ata Uvanu v'acharta mikol amelashon v'keiravtanu l'shimcha gadol sela be'emet l'hodod lecha u'yachedcha b'yava Baruch atah Adonai Abocher b'yamo Yisrael b'yava Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Yavteit Elohecha b'chol b'chav v'kol mashkol b'miyadecha v'ayod v'yima'il le'asher l'chitzah Shiv Adonai Elohechem Emed. L'dor v'ador kayam mishma kayam kisona kon makutavim minatalad kayamet. Emet shatu Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu Malkeinu melech avotenu Gwaleinu koel avotenu yotzenu tzur Yeshuateinu Hodeinu matzileinu me'olam shemecha Ein Elohim zulatecha Ezrat avotenu atahu me'olam Magnu v'shilune mechorem b'chol dur v'adur Seed kad siyad Tilot lelelion b'rakum vorach Moshe uvnei Yisrael echanu shibra Simcha rabba v'yamaru kulam Mi chamocha b'elim Adonai Mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh Norati hilot osefele Shibra chadasha Shib chukulim l'shimcha svatayam Yachad kulam Hodavim lechu v'yamaru Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed Tzur Yisrael Kuma v'yezrat Yisrael Uv'dei chinumecha Yehuda v'Yisrael Go aleinu Adonai tzvot shemo Kadosh Yisrael Baruch atah Adonai God Yisrael.
Page 306. We now begin the repetition of the Shachrit Amida, page 306.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Hayel HaGadol HaGibor v'Norah El Elyon, Komel Chasadim Tovim B'Konei Akol, V'Zocher Chastei Avot, Mevigo Elivnei V'Neihem L'man Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, Atah Gibor Li'olam Adonai, Chaim Etimat Rav L'Hoshia, Mechalkel Chaim B'Chesed, Mechayim Etim B'Rachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim, Rovei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Mekayem Emanato Lishenei Afar, Michamo Kabal Gevurot Midom Melach, Melech Meimitum Chayem Atzmiach Yeshua, V'nemanata Lachayot Metim, Baruch Atah Adonai, Mechayei HaMetim. Nekadesh et shimcha ba'olam, Kishem shemakdishim oto b'shmei maram, Kakatuv al yad neviyecha, V'karazel ze v'yamar. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzavot, Meloch Haaretz Kevodo. Az B'kol Rosh Gadol, Adir V'chazak, Mashmim Kol, Midnasim Liyamat Serafim, Liyamat Ham Baruch Yomeru. Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkom Malkeinu Tofia V'timloch Aleinu Ki Mechakim Anachnu Lach Matai Timloch B'Tzion V'Karob Yameinu Yolam Va'ed Tishkon Tit Gadal V'tit Kadash V'toch Yerushalayim Ircha L'dor v'ador U'lenetzach U'lenetzach Netzachim V'eineinu Tirena Malchutecha Kadavar Hamur B'shirei Uzecha Al Yedei David Mashiach Tzidkecha. Yimloch Adonai Le'olam Elayich Tzion L'dor v'ador Hallelujah L'dor v'ador Nagid Godlecha L'netzach netzachim Kedushat Chanakdish V'shivkacha Eloheinu Mivinu Li'amush Le'olam V'ed Ki HaMelech Gadol V'kadosh Atah Baruch Atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh Atah v'kartanu mikol ha'amim ahavtanu ratzita banu v'nomatanu mikol ha'shanot kidashtanu mitzvotecha v'keravtanu malkeinu la'avodatecha v'shimcha gadol v'akadosh aleinu karata ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה, מועדים לשמחה, חגים וזמנים לששון. את יום חג הסוכות הזה, זמן שמחתנו מקרא קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, יעלה ויבוא ויגיע, ידע וירצה וישמע ויבקד ויזכר, זיכרוננו ופיקדוננו, וזיכרון אבותינו, וזיכרון משיח בן דוד עבדך, וזיכרון ירושלים עיר קודשך, וזיכרון כל עמך בית ישראל לפניך, לפליטה לטובה, לכן חסד ורחמים לחיים ושלום, ביום חג הסוכות הזה. זוכרנו אדוני אלוהינו בוא לטובה, ופקדנו בוא לברכה, והושיענו בוא לחיים. ובדבר ישוע ורחמים כוסכוננו ורחם עלינו והושיענו, כי אליך עינינו, כי אל מלך חנון ורחום אתה. והעשיינו, אדוני אלוהינו את ברכת מועדיך, לחיים ולשלום לשמחה וששון, כאשר רצית, ואמרת לברכנו, אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך, סבנו מטובך ושמחנו בישועתך, ותאר ליבנו ליודך באמת, והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו בשמחה וששון מועדי קודשך, וישמחו בך ישראל מקדשי שמך, ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש ישראל בזמנים. רצי אדוני אלוהינו בעמך ישראל בתפילתם, והשבת עבודה לתפיר ביתך, ותפילתם יבוא תקבל ברצון, ותהי רצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך, ותחזינה עינינו בשובך לציון ברחמים, ברוך אתה אדוני המחזיר שכינתו לציון. מודים אנחנו לך, שתרנו אלוהינו ואבותינו. הטוב כי לא כלו רחמך, וימלכם פעולתם וחסדך, מעולם קיווינו לך ועל כולם. יתברך ויתרומם שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד, כל החיים ידעו חסד לה, ויעללו את שמך באמת. האל ישועתנו ועזרתנו סלע, ברוך אתה אדוני. הטוב שמך ולך נאה להודות. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, ברכנו בברכם שלשת, בתורה כתובה על ידי משה עבדך, אמורה מפי אהרון ובניו כהנים, עם קדושך כאמור. יברכך אדוני וישמרך, יאר אדוני פניו אליך ויחונך, יישא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום. שים שלום בעולם טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך. ברכנו אבינו, כולנו כאחד באור פניך, כי באור פניך נתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, תורת חיים ואהבת חסד, וצדקה וברכה, ורחמים וחיים ושלום, וטוב בעיניך, לברך את עמך ישראל, כל עת וכל שעה בשלומך, ברוך אתה אדוני. המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום.
So before we do Hallel, if everyone would like to take a etrog and a lulav, Now, because of the pandemic, we're asking if once you take yours, hold on to that for the rest of the service. Let's not share our Levit Etrogim as we normally can. There should be enough for everyone to take their own. If everyone can just remain social distance as they get their lulav and etrog, we appreciate that. And we'll take just a moment to do that before we get ready for Hallel. So I want to thank Rabbi Horowitz for putting together all the sets. We're fortunate to have him do every year. It's a lot of work, so thank you, Rabbi Horowitz, for doing.
Help.
And you had help. All right. But you were in charge, so. Sort of. Now, when you take it, when you get it, we'll turn to page 315. In just a moment, Rabbi Horowitz will lead us in the bracha. This is our first time to be able to take lulav and etrog. Of course, the first day of Sukkot yesterday was Shabbat, so we weren't given an opportunity to do so. When we say the bracha, the pitom faces down. And you hold it the opposite way in which it grows. But after we say the blessing, then you turn over the etrog. And you hold it during the different parts of Hallel, the way in which it grows. And then holding the other three species, the aravot, the willows, go on your left side, and the hadassim, the myrtles, go on your right side. The three myrtles go on your right side as you face the lulav. Page 315, the bracha for the first time for lulav and etrog.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu hanetilat lulav. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shechayanu v'kiyamanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh.
So you turn the etrog over and do the shake. We continue now. We're ready for Hallel as we hold our lulav and etrog, page 316.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu likro et Hallel.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu likro et Hallel.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, Adonai, hallelujah, Shem Adonai, Shem Mekimi me'afrada me'ashpat yarim evyon hoshivi im nedivei amo moshivi akeret abayit eim abanim semecha. Hallelujah. Say
Israel, mi Mitzrayim, Yaakov me'am loez.
Malecha hayam,
Malecha hayam,
Kitanu,
Kitanus,
Hayarden,
Hayarden,
Tis Tisov leachor.
Tisov leachor.
Eharim.
Eharim.
Tirkedu kelim.
Tirkedu kelim.
Gevaot.
Gevaot.
Kivnei tzon.
Kivnei tzon.
Milifnei Adon.
Milifnei Adon.
Kuli aretz.
Kuli aretz.
Milifnei.
Milifnei.
Elohai Yaakov.
Elohai Yaakov.
Ahofchi Hatzur.
Aoki Hatzor.
Agamayim.
Agamayim.
Halamish.
Halamish.
Lemainamayim.
Lemainomayim.
Lolanu, lolanu. Shim koten
Lolanu,
kabodot
lolanu,
pastor,
lolanu,
kalamitecha,
shmako.
lamayom, ragoyim, Yisrael b'tach b'Adonai, Zramu maginamu, Beit Haron b'tchuv Adonai, Zramu maginamu, Yirei Adonai b'tchuv Adonai, Zramu maginamu, Adonai zacharanu yevarech. Yevarech et Beit Yisrael, Yevarech et Beit Aaron, Yevarech Yirei Adonai,
Hakatanim im Hagadolim, Yosef Adonai Aleichem,
Aleichem bi'al b'neichem, Beruchim atem l'Adonai, Oseh shamayim ba'aretz, shamayim l'Adonai, ve'haaretz natan livnei Adam, lo hametim yehallelujah, ve'lo kol yordei duma, v'anachnu nevarech yah, me'ata ve'ad olam, me'ata ve'ad olam, hallelujah. Ahavti Yishma Adonai v'ritach nunai.
Page 318.
Et halech lifnei Adonai, v'artzot hachayim, emanti ki adaber, ani aniti miyod, ani amarti v'chavzi, kol hadam kosev,
Kosev.
mashiv Adonai kotag melodi alai,
Kosu Zavisham Hashem Ekra.
L'chayis bach zevach toda, v'shem Adonai ekra, D'Adonai l'Adonai Yashalem, negdana l'chol amo, v'chatzrot beit Adonai, v'cheich Yerushalayim, hallelujah. Hallelujah et Adonai, kol goyim, shabachu, kol haumim, ki gavar aleinu chasto, v'emet Adonai le'olam. Hallelujah. Hodu Adonai ki tov ki li'olam chasto. Yamar na yeah. Israel, ki le'olam chasto. Yom Navid Adron, ki le'olam chasto.
Yamruna Beta Ram.
Yomrna Yirei Adonai, ki le'olam chasto.
Yomruna Yirei Adonai ki le'olam hasto.
Mina meitzar karati anani v'merchav yadonai. Pithuli Sharei Tzedek Avavam Odeyam Zeshar Ladonai Tzadikim Yavovo Odeka Ki Anitani Vatili Lishua Odeka Ki Anitani Vatili Lishua Even Masu Habonim Haita L'Rosh Pina Even Masu Habonim Haita L'Rosh Pina Me'et Adonai Haitazot Iniflat Be'einenu Me'et Adonai Haitazot Iniflat Be'einenu Zayam Asadonai Nagila Venismechava Zayam Asadonai Nagila Venismechava Adonai, ho, Shia, na, Adonai, ho, Shia, na, Anadonai atzlikana, Anadonai atzlikana. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, barachnu kem mibeit Adonai, barachnu b'shem Adonai. Oh, to Adonai, ki tov, ki le'olam chasto. Oh, do Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasto. Yodu Adonai Eloheinu k'masech v'chasidev yosedik k'maseh v'tzonech. Kilakatov, Laudod, Lashem Galena Zamer, Milamad Olamatel, Baruchat Adonai, Melech Mehulal, Batishbachot.
Amen. And you can put your Lulavim and Targim down, and we continue now with Kaddish Shalem, page 321.
Yikadav Yikadav Shemei Rabbah. Yomadi Vraki Rutev Yamikmal Kutev. Chaychonavim Ekonum Chayrako Beit Yisrael. Vagalav Vizman Karivim Edu. Amen. Yehesh Meid Rabbah Mavorach. Yalam Alal Me'almaya. Yebarach Vishtabach Vitparvin Ram Vietnase Viradar Viralev Yitalal Shmei Kudisha Berechu Liela Min Kol Birchatav Shirata Tushkatav Nekmata Damiran Bialma Vimru Amen Hitkabot Sloton Uvoton Decho Yisrael Kadama Von Vishmaya Vimru Amen Yehesh Lamalabam Min Shmaya Chaimalin of Yalko Yisrael Vimru Amen Oseh Shalom Mimramav V'yaseh Shalom Aleinu v'yalkol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen.
We turn the page to page 322 as we get ready to begin the festival Torah service.
Ein kamocha v'Elohim Adonai v'ein kamasecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Yimloch, Leolam Vaen, Adonai Oz Le'amo Yitain, Adonai Yifarech, Et Amo V'Shalom, Avarachamim, Eitiva V'Ritzomcha, Et Zion. Tivnech Hamot Yerushalayim, Tivnech Hamot Yerushalayim, Kivecha Levad Batachnu, Melech El Ram V'Nisa, Adonai Olamim.
Please rise.
Vayehi bin Saharan, Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, V'yafutzu oyevecha, V'yanusu mesanecha, Mipanecha, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, Udvar Adonai, Mirushalayim, Baruch Shenatan, Torah le'amo, Baruch Shenatan, Torah le'amo Yisrael, B'kedushato, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'chanun, Erech Apayim, V'rav Chesed V'emed, Notzer Chesed La'alavim, Nosei Avon V'afesha, V'chata V'nakei, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'chanun, Erech Apayim, V'rav Chesed V'emed, Notzer Chesed La'alafim, Nosei Avon V'afesha, V'chata V'nakei, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'chanun, Erech Apayim, V'rav Chesed V'emed, Notzer Chesed La'alafim, Nosei Avon V'afesha, V'chata V'nakei. Vani tefilati l'Adonai et ratzon Elohim b'rov chastecha aneni b'emet yishecha Vani tefilati lecha Adonai et ratzon Elohim b'rov chastecha aneni b'emet yishecha Vani tefilati lecha Adonai et ratzon Elohim b'rov chastecha aneni b'emet Yishecha.
You take the first one, I'll take the second one. I'll turn the microphone around more.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonai, Kadosh Shemo.
Abu Adonai Iti, Urama, Shmo Yachdav, Lecha.
Adonai, Hageduva,
Hagevura, Hagiveret, Ze'Heitza, Ze'od, Tikol Bashamayim, Uvaretz, Lecha Adonai,
Amamlacha, V'vandi Naseh, V'chol Era, Ramemu Adonai Mahili. Ki Kadosh, Adonai Eloheinu.
And you may be seated. So today we turn to page 723 in our Chomashim from the book of Vayikra, chapter 22, verse 26. Same reading as yesterday, so we all know it by heart. We'll go through all the Shlosh Regalim, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, all the reminders of the different holidays like Sukkot that we keep throughout the year. Begin on verse 26.
V'yazrav Yelem v'yashol l'chochosim bo v'namar amen. HaKol havu gol Eloheinu nichavet ra kohen krav yamod HaKohen. Baruch Shatan Torah le'amo Yisrael b'kishato. V'yatem revek munai lo'echa ham chayim kocham hayo. Okay, we are somewhere over here.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvorah.
Baruch Nevrach Olam Voed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher rakal banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor. Shor chesed v'eis ki avalad v'haya. Shivat yamim tachad imo. Umiyam hashmini v'hala yeratzeh the korbani shel Adonai. V'shor oseh. Otov yebenda lo tishchatu b'yom echad. V'chitis b'chu zevach Torah l'Adonai l'rtzomchem tizbachu. Bayom ahu yeacheh lo titeru imenu ad boker anihi Adonai. Ushmartem mitzvotai v'asitem otam anihi Adonai. V'lo techalalu et shem kodshi v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael ani Adonai b'kanishchem hamotzi etchem eretz Mitzrayim v'ilnachem l'Elohim anihi Adonai v'aydaber Adonai Moshe lemor daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yamar ta'alehem moadei Adonai asher tikru otam mikra'ei kodesh elahem moadai shesh yamim te'asem l'acham uvayom ha'shvi Shabbat Shabbatam mikra kodesh kamalacha lo ta'asu Shabbat hi l'Adonai b'chol moshvatechem. Don't go away.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yamel kohen bimkom Levi. Same place we left off.
Baruch atah Adonai hamvorach.
Baruch v'rach olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chal banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Eila moadei Adonai mikra'ei kodesh asher tikru otam moadam b'chodesh harishon v'arba'asa l'chodesh bein ha'arbayim Pesach l'Adonai uv'chamisha yom l'chodesh hazeh chag hamatzot l'Adonai shivat yamim matzot tochelu b'yom harishon mikra kodesh yeh lachem chol melech avodah lo ta'asu v'kraftem Mishel Adonai shivat yamim b'yom ha'shvi'i mikra kodesh chol melech avodah lo ta'asu v'aydaber Adonai Moshe lemor daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yamar ta'alehem ki tavo el haaretz asher ani noten lachem uksartem et ktsiraha v'havetem et omer reshit ktsirchem el hakohen v'heini v'da omer lifnei Adonai l'rtzonechem v'machorat ha'shabbat yinifenu hakohen v'asitem b'yom hanifchem et omer k'haves tamim ben shnato le'olal Adonai u'minchato shnei esronim sol eb'lulav Hashemen ishel Adonai re'ach nichoach v'nizkal yain revi tahin v'lechem v'kaliv v'charmel lo tochlu ad etzem hayom hazeh ad aviachem et korban Elohechem chukat olam l'dorotechem v'chol moshvotechem.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Tavot shlishi.
Baruch Adonai hamvorach.
Baruch v'rach olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Usfartem lachem imachorat hashabbat miyom aviachem et omer hatanufa sheva shabbatot imimoti yanam ad imachorat hashabbat hashvi tisperu chamishim yom v'kraftem mincha charashal Adonai v'moshvotechem taviu lechem tenufa shtayim shnei esronim soletiana chabetz te'afena v'kurim Adonai v'kraftem alalachem Shivat kivasim tamimim and Aishana, Ofa ben Bakar, Echad velim shnayim, Yiyu ladana min pataminis keham isharak nechoach ladonai, Vasitam serizim echad lechatad, Ushnei kivasim and Aishana lezevach shlamim, Ve'nif hakohen, Otamal. Lechem abikurim to do falif ne'Adonai al shnei kavasim kodesh yiyu l'Adonai l'kohen ukratem bi'etzem hayom hazeh mikra kodesh yelachem chol melech avodah lo ta'asu chukat Chukadolam, Chomosh Votechem, Lodotechem, Overkutzrachem, Ekatziratzachem, Lotakala, Piatzat, Habakutzracha, Balakitsircha, Lotalake, Leoni, Vlager, Tazo, Ovotam, Ani, Adonai Loechem.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Amen. Talmud Revi.
We should leave off. Amen. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael lemor, b'chodesh hashvi'i, v'yachor lachodesh Elochem Shabbos zikron tiroch mikol kodesh, komen leka sabado lo sasu, hikraf tami shel Adonai. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, ak be'oshor lachodesh, Hashivi hazayam hakipurim hu mikro kodesh yelochem minisem esnasher sechem mikraftem mishel Adonai v'kom locho lo sasu be'etzem hayom hazeh ki yom kippurim hu lekaper aleichem lifnei Adonai Elohechem ki kocha nefesh asher lo seuneh be'etzem hayom hazeh v'nikruso me'ameho v'kocha nefesh asher taseh kol melacha be'etzem hayom hazeh v'habadti es nefesh hahi mikerev amor kol melacha lo sasu hukasu lom l'derot sechem v'kol mishvot sechem Shabbat, Shabbos, and Hu, Lochem, Vinisem, Esnasher, Sechem, Besishor, Lachodesh, Bo Erev, Me Erev at Erev, Tish Besu, Shabbat, Chem.
Any motion or prayer suffer someone who is ill, please rise at this time. Zevin Binyamin, Michelle Weiss Cohen, Debbie Spiegel, Rosen, Jim Rosenthal, Shmuel Zama, Holly Ben Razel, Abraham Baruch Ben Yoel, Chaya Malta Bat Mendel, John Petty, Moshe Pesach Ben Begela, Mordechai Hirsch Ben Rachel, Devon Rachel Bat Chana Sarah, Rachel Yaffa Bat Sarah, President Donald Trump, Melania Trump.
Senator Mike Lee. Governor Christie. Mike Lee, Chris Christie. Mike Lee, Chris Christie.
Mike Lee.
Chris Christie. There's a whole list. Mike Lee, Chris Christie. Kaylee, not Kaylee, Kellyanne Conway.
Kellyanne Conway.
I don't have the list in front of me. I know we're going to do this.
Alan Becker, Ronnie Wells, Julie Lucinowski, Schwab, Thang, Buchan, Ricardo Faulkner, Hamburger, Schools Alvin, Razel, Catherine Pfeffer, Luba Moloch, Alaska, Kelly Service Pine, Jim Fish, Malcolm Brody, Levy, Senator LaBelle, Aaron Kiriarki, Bill Spencer Pearl, Bill Turner, Billy Lake, Time Blazer, Ty Bill, Hannah Mosby, Don Elvin, Chilami, Don Povos, George Noon, Gary Cohendorf, Ursula Ben Pine, Horst Pine, Hannah, Israel Ben Gittel, James Whitehead, Jamil Kaiser, Bill Gregoire, Fungai T. Fong, Rex Marco, Sarah Van DVD, Sarah Gittel, Freda, Shane Olivo, Esther, Shanapana, Toba Roche, Bill Zubble, Upland Razel, Yosef Bala, Sarah Rifki Levy, Rick Kaminsky, Andrew Kaminsky, Polly Ford, Alvin Washington, Dahlia Schinzel, Harold Katzen, Lee Rucker, Susan Recker, Herman Levin, Allison Levin, Rico, Babesa, Gabriel, Oya, Maria, Kaiba, Esther, Kava, the Water, Babela, Kaibaraka, Esther, Bob Rifka, Abu, Pasadena, Batena, Bob Vertical, Molly, Polly, Bob, Robbie, Skarza, Hiroshima, Himalaya, Himalaya, Robin, Thomas, Hilton, Yeshua, Hammer, Force, and Women of Shemai, Tosha, Israel, Yom Tov, Lisa, Bashkava, was on Paris, Amen. We're ready to be down somewhere in the motion.
That's it.
Thanks, 729, apparently.
Baruch et Adonai HaVarak. Baruch Adonai HaVarak le'olam v'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'char banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen.
Amen. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael lemor, v'hamisho osor, yam lahodes hashvi hazeh, chag hasukos, shiva shomim Adonai. Vayom horishon mikvor kodesh, kol melekas abadol lo sasu, shiva shomim, tekrivu ishe Adonai. Vayom Hashemini Mikro Kodesh Yelochem Mikraftem Ishel Adonai Atzeres Hi Kom Lekes Havadolo Sasu Ele Moadei Adonai Ashir Tikru Osom Mikro E Kodesh Vahakri Visheh Ladonai O Lo Umincho Zevach Musokim Devoyom Biomo Milvad Shabsehos Adonai, Umilvad Matno Seichem, Umilvad Kol Nidrechem, Umilvad Kol Nidboseichem, Asher Tidnu Adonai. Ak Bahamisho Oso Yom, Lachodes Hashaviyeh, Biosfukem, Estuas Hores, Tohugu Es Hagadonoi Shiva Shomim, Vayom Horishon Shabosam, Vayom Hashivini Shabosam, Ulakaktam Lochem, Vayom Horishon, Peri, Eis Hodor, Kapos, Timorim, Banaf, Eis Ovels, Vyabe Noha, Usmaktam, Lifnei, Adonai Elohechem Shiva Shomim, Vahagos Amoso, Hagladonoi, Shiva Shomim Bashono, Hukaso Lom Liderosechem, Bahudis Hashvi Tohuku Oso, Basukos Teshvu Shiva Shomim, Koho Ezrok Yisrael, Yeshvu Basukos, Leman, Yedu Derosechem, Ki Basukos, Hoshapti Espene Yisrael, Bahutsi Osom Me'eres Mitzrayim, Ani Adonai Elohechem, by the Bear Moshe, Esmoadei Adonai, El Bnei Yisrael.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'hayei olam natan b'tuneinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Please rise.
Yeah.
Yiskara, Yiskara, Shemei Rabbi.
Amen.
Yomodi Broki Usay, Yamlik Malkusay, Payichon, Yomechon, Chaye the Kobesh Yisrael, Bagolobis Mankore, Vimaru. Amen. Yeshmei Rabbi Mavora, Yolom Alom Yomaya, Yismorak, Barak, V'yishtabak, V'yishrar, V'yishraman, V'yisnaseh, V'yisadar, V'yisalev, V'yishalo, Shemei Dekudesho, Elam, Min Kol, B'choso, V'shimoso, Tishposo, Nemoso, Damirom, Yolamo, V'yimeru. Amen. Is this one?
You looking this one?
I guess so.
Go ahead. Keep going.
Asher Samoshe, Livnei Bnei Yisrael, Ab Yadonai, B'yad
Can't get good help anymore. Can't get great advertising. Okay, let's just leave it down. Let's leave it down. I'm reading again. I already read this yesterday. Lost the plot. Right here.
You may be seated.
Right here. It's still right there.
Baruch Hu Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Baruch Olam Vayad.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Li'olam Vayet. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Asher b'chabonu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Uvachamisha Sahayam Lacharesh Hashvi. Vikra Karesh Yalachem Kamalachan Avodalo Tasu. V'chagotem Chag Adonai Shiva Yamim. Vikraftem Ola Yisharech Nechoach Adonai. Parim Revaka Shosha Asar Elim Shnayim. Kavasim Reshana Arba Asar Tamimim Yiyu. Umin Chatam Salabulava Shaman. Shlosha Esronim Lapar Hayachad. Lishlosha Asar Parim. Shnei Esronim La Hayachad Lishnei Haylim. Visaron Isaron La Kavas Hayachad Arba Asar Kavasim. Zrizim Echad Chatad. Milvad Olat Tamid. Min Chatav and Iskar.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Asher natan lanu Torah Temet. Chayei Olam Natav B'Docheinu. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah. Yamdu HaMaviva Sefer Sheni. V'Sot HaTorah Asher Moshe Livnei Bnei Yisrael Ab Yadonai Yad Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe.
You may be seated. The Haftarah that we read for the second day of Sukkot comes from 1 Kings. So if you're following along at home, you're going to want to go find that in your Tanakh. 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 2 is where it starts. We're on page 1256 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, if that's where you're following along. If you read the Haftarah on its own, it's very interesting because it really describes the transition between David and Solomon and kind of, being the people of Jews, Israelites who live in the wilderness to being people who really are established with our own land and our temple and all that stuff. But that aside, for Sukkot, this Haftarah conceives of God as this sukkah for all of us, which is a really beautiful way of thinking about God and nice to think about on Sukkot. Once again, the Haftarah for the second day of Sukkot is found in 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 2. That's page 1256, really 1257 in your Eitz Chaim Chumash.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratzav divrei emanim adrim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai abocher b'Torah u'v'Moshe avdo u'v'Yisrael amovin b'yei ha'emet v'tzedek v'yikalu El HaMelech Shlomo Kol Ish Yisrael V'yerech ha'etanim bechag Hu HaChodesh HaShvi V'yavo Kol Ziknei Yisrael V'yisu HaKohanim et Aaron V'yalu et Aaron Adonai V'yerahu El Moed V'yel Kokalei HaKodesh Asher Ba'oel V'yalu Otam HaKohanim V'halaviyim, v'amelech Shlomo, v'chladad Yisrael anoadim alav, ito lifnei Aharon, mezabchim tzon v'akar, asher lo yisafru, v'lo yimanu merov, v'yaviu hakohanim, et Aaron b'rit Adonai, El Mekamo, El Devir, Abayid El Kodesh, HaKodeshim, El Tachat, Kanfei Akruvim, Ki Akruvim, Porsim, Kanafayim, El Mekom, Aaron, Ayasau, Akruvim, Al Haaron, V'Abadav, Minamala, Vayarichu Habadim, Vayerahu Rashi Habadim min HaKodesh al pnei HaDevir v'lo yerahu achutza vayiyu sham ad hayom hazeh ein ba'aron rak shnei lukot avanim asher iniach sham Moshe b'chorev Asher karat Adonai im b'nei Yisrael b'tzeitam v'yeretz Mitzrayim v'yihi k'tzei kohanim min HaKodesh v'hanan malei beit Adonai v'lo yachlu HaKohanim lamod sharet mipnei Hanan k'malei chavod Adonai et beit Adonai Az Amar Shlomo Adonai Amar Lishkon Ba'arafel Bano Vaniti Beit Zavul Lach Machon L'shivtecha Olamim Vayaseh V'amelech et Banav Vayavarech et Kol Kahal Yisrael Kol Kahal Yisrael Omeid Vayomer Baruch Adonai Elohei Yisrael Asher Diber B'Fivei David Avi V'yado Milei Lemor Min Hayam Asher Hotzeiti Et Ami Et Yisrael Mimitzrayim Lo V'acharti V'ir Mikol Shiftei Yisrael Livnot Bayit Liyot Shemisham Vayavchar b'David Liyot al Ami Yisrael Vayehi im Levav David Avi Livnot Bayit L'Shem Adonai Elohei Yisrael Vayom Adonai El David Avi Yan Asher Ayim Levavcha Livnot Bayit Lishmi Etivota Ki Hayim Levavecha Rakata Lo Tivne Abayit Ki Im Bincha Hayotze Mechalatzecha Uyivne Abayit Lishmi Vayakem Adonai et devaro asher diber va'akum tachat David avi vayshev al kisei Yisrael kasher diber Adonai vayevne abayit l'shem Adonai Elohei Yisrael va'asim sham makom la'aron asher sham brit Adonai asher karati mavotenu botziotam Eretz Mitzrayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol olamim tzadik b'chol dorot ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer v'yoseh medaberim kayem shekol dvarav b'mitzvot tzedek ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'ne'emanim dvarecha v'davarcha mivarecha achol yeshu breikam yemelech ne'eman v'rachmana baruch atah Adonai Ha'el ha'ne'eman chol dvarav rachem al Tzion ki beit chayenu v'la'adu ad nefesh toshia b'meira v'yameinu baruch atah Adonai v'sameach Tzion b'vaneha samcheinu Adonai Eloheinu b'Eliyahu hanavi avdecha v'malchu b'David Mashiachecha b'meira yavo v'yagel libeinu al kiseh lo yeshev zar lo yinchadu arachirim et kvodo v'b'shem kodshcha nishbata lo Shelo yichben eiro li'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Magen David Al Torah v'al Avodah v'al Anbiyim v'al Yom Chag HaSukkot hazeh Shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu l'sason u'simcha l'chavod u'tifaret halakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach u'morchim otach yiparach shimcha b'fi kol chai tamid li'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim.
Oshrei, whatever page Oshrei is on. We continue with Oshrei, whatever page it's on. I'm on 334, but that's a different book. 180? Page 181. Oshrei Yoshvei Vetecha Od Yalucha Selah. Tehillah LaDavid Arim Micha Elohai HaMelech Vavrachashim Chali Eloham Va'ed. Gadol Adonai U'Mulam Yahav V'Ligdul To'en Cheker. Hadar Kivod Odecha V'Nifrei Niflatecha Sicha. Zecher Rav Tivcha Yabi V'Tzitchatcha Yaranenu. Tov Adonai Lakol V'Rachma V'Kol Masahav. Kivod Malchutcha Yomeru U'Gevuratcha Yadaberu. Malchutcha Malchut Kol Olamim Memshaltecha B'Chol Dor V'Ador. Einei Cholecha Yisaberu V'Ata Noten Lahem Et Ochlam B'Yito. Tzadik Adonai B'Chol Daracha V'Chasid B'Kol Ma'asav. Ritzon Yerei Av Ya'aseh V'Yetshavatam Yishma V'Yeshien. Tehillah Adonai Yadaber HaPi V'Rekabos Hashem Kashel Eloham Va'ed V'Anachnu Nevarechya V'Ata V'Yad Eloham Hallelujah. Not yet. No. Gary, not yet. Steve. And Nick. I need someone to take the other two off. I can't carry two of them. Go ahead. I think it's the lighter. Yahalu Hashem Adonai Ki Yishkav Shemo Levado Odo Eretz V'Sham Ha'ayim Vayaharem Teherem Leamo Tila Lecho Asida Livnei Yisrael Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Ravin Mishmor, Ladonai Haaretz Umeloa, Tedel V'Yoshve V'Yoshveva, Ki Hu Hayamim Yesada, V'Al Neharot Yechoneneha, Mi Ya'adev Har Adonai, O Mi Yakom Bimkom Kodsho, Neki Papayim Uvaleva, Asher V'Nasad Ashat Nafshi, Lo Nishma Lebihima, Yisa Beracham Yeit Adonai, Od Tzedakam Elohei Yisho, Zedor Dosham, Mevakshe Panecha Yaakov Zela, So She'arim Rosh Hashanah, Ve'inasu Pitkei Olam, Ve'yavo Melech HaKavod, Mizeh Melech HaKavod, Adonai Yizus V'Gibor, Adonai Gibor Milchama, So She'arim Rosh Hashanah, Oseu Pitkei Olam, Ve'yavo Melech HaKavod, Mihuzeh Melech HaKavod, Adonai Tzvaot, U'Melech HaKavod Selah.
Chag Sameach. Okay, this is Man Simchatenu. It's a time of our great joy. So I hate to interrupt that for a minute here, but we live in difficult times. So let's just kind of say some of the things, right? So unlike in Harry Potter, where we don't mention the bad guy's name because it's too scary, let's just call it what it is. We have a plague going on in this world. A real plague, right? This disease that is dangerous, it's infected lots of people, and it's killing people, and now even our president. We have a plague in our country. That plague is causing social isolation. That's why we don't have a full sanctuary. Of course, during the holidays during the week, we don't necessarily have a full sanctuary anyway, but we didn't have a full sanctuary on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It was empty hallways. And we certainly don't have as many people coming on Shabbat as we used to. And even on Chag, we have more people in the sanctuary than we do today. We're not gathering together to pray. We're not gathering with our friends in large numbers generally to have lunch and other kind of social events anymore. And some of us are actually staying home most of the time. So we're much more socially isolated than we've ever been, and that's depressing. There's uncertainty. For some people, there's job insecurity. For some people, there's health insecurity. Other people there's political uncertainty for sure right now. We have environmental challenges, fires from the West Coast, floods in the Gulf, and other kinds of environmental upheaval. And then we have a plague of trying to understand what truth is. That could be the subject of a whole different sermon. I don't want to go into a lot of detail on that now, but suffice to say, something we are all aware of, I think, is confirmation bias. We're sort of psychologically programmed to believe things that resonate with something we already believe. When we hear something new, if it resonates and it confirms our biases already, we say, yeah, that's real. We don't stop to think about it. And if it sort of attacks something that we believe is real, that we fundamentally believe is true, and we hear something that disturbs us about it, we reject it automatically. We don't stop and think about it. That's called confirmation bias. And in a world where there is a miasma of misinformation on the internet, and trust me, there is a miasma of misinformation on the internet coming from all sides, this is really dangerous. We no longer have a direct sense of what's true and real, and that is also confounding and upsetting. So all of these different things can lead to despair. But as I said at the beginning, this is Man Simchatenu, the time of our great joy, and I'm a rabbi, and I'm supposed to bring you some uplifting and inspirational ideas. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to turn to our prayer book. And we're about to do Hoshanot. These are special prayers where we ask God to Hoshana, save us, or help us, please. And interestingly enough, this tradition of singing Hoshanot goes back to temple times. They used to do this in Second Temple period. The Mishnah records that they would draw water from the Shiloach pool and they'd pour it over the altar in the temple, and the priests would circle around the altar and sing Hoshanot, while the Levite choir was singing with them and the Levite orchestra was playing music, and it was a big celebration and a big party. And they're singing and dancing and they're singing, save us, please help us. And the first question you might have is, that's an odd thing to say if you're happy and and you know it, right? You're supposed to, if you're happy and you know it, you're supposed to clap your hands. But they're singing, save us, right? So what are we asking God to save us from? The simple answer with the pouring of the water is they wanted the rain to come. This is supposed to be the beginning of the rain season. And so they're praying to God that it should rain. And because our ancestors didn't understand really the weather, and they certainly couldn't control the weather, they wanted to do something because, they understood that human beings are supposed to be God's partners. We're supposed to be God's agents in helping to make things happen in the world. So they felt like they had to do something to help the rain come. So they draw water from the Shiloh pool and they pour it over the altar to say, this is how it's going to rain. And then they would sing and dance because they knew that God was going to be there for them. So I want to take a look now at these Hoshanot prayers, and maybe we can find inspiration. We don't believe that we can control the weather by pouring water on the ground, but perhaps we can draw some other inspiration from these Hoshanot prayers. So if you have a prayer book at home, in the Lev Shalem, it's on page 383. And if you don't, I'm sorry, I'll try and repeat some of the words here and then give you some of a commentary. Okay, so the Hoshanot begin with 4 sentences. Hoshana lama'ancha Eloheinu. Save us or help us for your sake, our God. The first thing I want to point out is it's for God's sake. We're asking God to help us for God's sake, not for ours. Because, as they used to say in an old Saturday Night Live sketch, we're not worthy, we're not worthy. Right? We're not so holy that we expect that God will be there for us because we are tzaddikim, righteous people. We know we're flawed characters, but we know that God cares about us. And so because God cares about us as a parent cares for their children no matter what they do, we ask God to be there for us. And then they use 4 different names for God. Eloheinu, our God. Boreinu, our creator, reminding God that he created us, right? This is what your children will say to you. Or if your children, what you say to your parents, you made me, aren't you going to be there for me? Goaleinu, our Redeemer. And we remember specifically that he redeemed us from slavery in Egypt. That's the paradigm. If he could take slaves out of Egypt, he can help us now. And then Dorshenu, which is an interesting expression here. Dorshenu is, he seeks after us. He doesn't just see the people who are in front of him. He goes after, pursues every one of us. He's interested in each one of our concerns. He seeks after us. He cares so much about us. And I just want to point out one other thing about this before I leave it, and that is, as most of the ancient prayers are, it's alphabetic. So, Eloheinu, Borenu, Goalenu, Dorshenu is Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled. First 4 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. That's the first part. That's the introduction. Then is Hoshana, and these were done, by the way, intentionally as short little phrases, 2-word phrases, and then the congregation responds Hoshana. They wanted everybody who's watching, the priests singing and dancing around the altar, to join in. Hoshana, that's the congregational response. And again, this is a 2-word statement, and it's alphabetic. Lema'an amitecha, with an aleph. Lema'an britecha, with a bet. Lema'an gadlecha, gadlach, with a gimel. And lema'an datach, right, with a dalet, so and so on. So the entire alphabet is here, not just the first 4 letters. So we're asking God to help us with all the letters of the alphabet. And I also want to point out that the first one, amitecha, is for the sake of your truth, right? One of the issues we're confronting today is, what is truth? What does it mean when they say God's truth? God's truth is the ultimate truth. God is not a Democrat. God is not a Republican. God isn't on Fox News, and he's not on MSNBC. God is the truth. God sees the whole picture, the complete picture. And perhaps when we say this, as in a few minutes we're going to pray this, we can pray to be inspired from God's perspective to help us to understand what's real and what's true in this world. I want to point out another one, and just another phrase, and we'll go to the next one. Lema'an ve'udcha. This is the vav line. Lema'an ve'udach, right? And va'ud is kind of a weird construction there, but it comes from the Hebrew root for moed. As in Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting that our ancestors used when they wandered in the wilderness. That was the tent of meeting, the central tent where God's presence would be experienced. But Moed is, of course, also the term for the festivals. The Shlosha Moedim, right? This is Moed, right? It's a festival. And so we encounter God not only in a specific place, in a tent of meeting, later in the temple, and now in our sanctuary here, we also experience God at appointed times and seasons, like our festivals, like Sukkot. Time and space. And so even though, again, this kind of relates to our situation today, we are isolated, not everybody's here in the sanctuary now, we can't come to our appointed place to experience and meet God, but this is an appointed season, Sukkot, the time for us to meet God because of the holiday. And so it kind of has this dual context of both space and time. Now we're going to go to the second one, and this is the most astounding one of all. It's on page 385. Very audacious of the rabbis. Ani v'ho Hoshana. Very confusing statement there. What is ho? That's the question. What is the word ho in Hebrew supposed to mean here? Ani v'ho Hoshana. Ani means I. Hoshana means save us, please. What is v'ho? So some people suggest this is another way to say Ana Adonai. Ho could be God's name, short for God's name, Yud, He, Vav, He. So the last 2 letters of God's name are He, Vav. And so maybe it's Ana Adonai. It's sort of like repeating the verse from the Psalms. Ana Adonai Hoshiana. Right? That's one way to understand it. But the Midrash understands it differently. And based on an interpretation of the Bible, the rabbis audaciously assert that when the Jews were in exile, first in Egypt and then in Babylonia, God was in exile with them. And the ho here is in fact God's name, but it's I and you, God. Save both of us. You need to save yourself because you are in exile, God, with us. Very audacious of the rabbis. But that is the common understanding of what this prayer is about. that we are both in exile now, and if God can redeem us, God can redeem God's self. What does that mean? Well, one thing it means is that God is wherever there are people who are suffering in the world. God is not on the side of the oppressors. God is on the side of the oppressed. God is with the oppressed people of the world. And God suffers when anyone in the world is being oppressed, because we're God's creatures. And so therefore, God wants to help those people because God isn't complete. God isn't whole. God isn't redeemed himself unless all God's creatures are redeemed. And that means God has empathy. And so in order to end God's suffering and our own, we need to be on the side of the liberators. Like God, we must have empathy for others and be God's agents of liberation. And that's, I think, the central meaning of this text. Once again, it uses an alphabetic acrostic, so it follows the Hebrew alphabet. Kehoshata, just as you have saved, Elim belod, right, with an aleph. Betseitcha is bet, right? And then in the next verse, Goy, Gimel, and Drushim, Dalid, right? So this is an alphabetic acrostic again. And all of the first letters of the alphabet through the Nun verse on the next page are dealing with God taking us out of Egypt. That's the paradigm of God taking us out of Egypt, rescuing us from slavery. And just as God rescued us in the past, we ask that God should rescue us now. What happens in the next verse, it's on page 386. I'll read in the English. As you rescued those who surrounded the altar carrying willows to adorn it, so save us. That's clearly a reference to the Hoshana ceremony in the temple. By the way, this prayer was not written during temple times. It was written a few centuries after the temple was destroyed by the great poet Elazar Kalir, and he was himself felt in exile in the Byzantine Empire under the Byzantine rule. It was an oppressive time for Jews, and so his prayer is calling on God to rescue Jews from the oppression of the Byzantine Empire. Right? So just as you used to be with us when we had a temple and we used to dance around our willows, save us now. And the next one is when you rescued the wondrous ark when it was violated, and in your anger you caused the violators to suffer. For those of you who don't know the story, it's kind of a funny story. It's about the Philistines who stole the ark. It's in the book of Samuel. He punished them with a particular illness, which we won't go into, and they sent the ark out back to the Israelites. Read it, it's a fun story. Okay, that's that one. Next, just as you were there with us in the exile in Babylonia, save us now. You were with us when we were exiled to Babylonia. That's the next two verses. You rescued the captured tribes of Jacob. That's also referring to the Babylonian exile. So also we ask that you rescue us now. And then there's the sum add verse, right? You'll notice that the one just above it ends with tashuv. That's the tough verse. So that ends the alphabetic acrostic. And then it says sum add. What is sum add? This was added later to the poem. This is not from Elazar Kalir anymore. Somebody later added it. We're not exactly sure who, but we know his name. His first name. How do we know his first name? Because another clever trick that these poets used to do is they'd put their name in their poems. Okay, so take a look. Shomre is shin, mitzvot is mem, v'choche is vav, El is Aleph, and Limoshaot is Lamed. His name was Shmuel. Do you see that? Shin, Mem, Vav, Aleph, Lamed. His name was Shmuel. He added this extra verse. So you can add the extra verse. Now I want to conclude with the last thing is a couple of verses from the Bible. The first one is from Psalm 28:9. Hoshia et amecha uvarech et nachaltecha. Right? Save your people. And here's the key phrase at the end. Ureim v'nasem adolam. Re'em comes from ro'eh, which means shepherd. Shepherd us. What does a shepherd do? He guides sheep in the right direction. We're asking God to guide us in the right direction in the middle of the crisis we're dealing with. Help us to focus on what's important. Push us, because we need to be pushed. We're a little depressed. We need a little energy. So push us, help us, guide us. Shove us in the right direction, v'nasem, and lift us up. We need to be uplifted. We need to be inspired. So we're praying to God to inspire us from now and forever. So the prayers in our prayer book can be seen to be addressing our situation now. We are being confronted with a number of things that I haven't seen in my whole lifetime. But it is Man Simchatenu. Today we're going to rejoice, and we're going to sing this song, and we're going to sing it with happy faces, because it's Man Simchatenu. It's time for us to rejoice. That's what Jews do. We take good and the bad together, and so we're going to be happy. Tomorrow, we're going to use God's guidance, shepherding us, and God's spirituality to lift us up so that we can go out and make this world a better place, to be God's agents, to be with the oppressed, so that we can free the oppressed, and God will be free, and God will be saved, and we'll be saved. Hoshana, save us, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Morgan, for a very important message. As we get ready now for the Musaf service, we rise, page 342.
Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabba Be'olamah divrach yerutei ve'yam lichmachutei V'chai echon uvyom echon V'chai edechol beit Yisrael Bagalav izman kariv ve'immeru amen Bagalav izman kariv ve'immeru amen
Amen.
Yehesh me'raba mevarach le'olam ulal me'omayah
Barach.
Yit barach ve'yishtabach ve'yit par ve'yit romam ve'yit naseh ve'yit hadar ve'yit aleh ve'yit halal shemei dekudesha brechu le'ela min kol birchatam ve'shirata tushbechata ve'nechemata Da'amiran bi'alema ve'imeru amen ve'imeru amen ve'imeru amen ve'imeru amen Atavak around the column. Yom Chag Sukkot.
If you're still reciting your silent prayers, please do so as we begin the repetition of the Musaf Hamidah, page 343.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov. Hawel Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol, v'Zocher Chazdei Avot, v'Mevi Goel Ifnei V'neihem, L'mahan Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer u'Moshiach u'Magen. Baruch atah Adonai, Mahagen Avraham, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayei Meitim Atah, Rav Lahoshia, Mechalkel Chayim B'Chesed, Mechayei Meitim B'Rachamim Rabim, Samech Noflim V'Rofei Cholim, O Matir Asurim, O Mekayem Emunato, Lishnei Afar, Michamocha Ba'al Gevurot, O Midom Melech, Melech Meimit Umechayei, O Matzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'emarat Alechayot Meitim, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayei HaMeitim. Naritzcha, V'nakdishcha, Kesod Siach, Sarfei Kodesh, HaMakdishim, Shimcha b'Kodesh, Ka'katuv al Yad Nevi'echa, V'kara ze el ze v'yamar. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevot, Melech ol haaretz kevodo, Melech ol haaretz kevodo, Kevodo malei olam, Kevodo malei olam, Mesharetav shoalim, Zelazeh, Aye Mekom Kevodo, Lumatam Baruch Yameru. Baruch Kevod Adonai Mimekomo, O Yifen Berachamim, Ve'yachodam Ham Yachadim Shemo, Ham Yachadim Shemo, Erev Avoker, V'cho Yom Tamid, Pamayim B'Yahava, Shema Omerim. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. O Eloheinu, O Avinu, O Malkeinu, O Moshiachenu, V'ho Yashmi'enu, Yashmi'enu b'rachamav, b'rachamav, Shenit l'nei kol chai, liot lachem l'Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem, Adir Adirenu Adonai Adoneinu, Ma'adir, שמחה בכל הארץ. והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. ולדברי קודשך כתוב לאמור. ימלוך אדוני לעולם ולעולם לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור אדוני גדגוד לך לנצח תשחקים קדושתך נקדיש. ושבחך להם מפינו לנו בשלום ועד. כי המלך קרוב וקדוש אתה. ברוך אתה אדוני. האוהל הקדוש.
Amen. All Kohanim and Leviim, please meet me outside as we prepare for Duchening.
אתה וקדרנו בכל העמים ואהבת אותם, רצית בנו, רמותם לכל שנה, וקדשתם במצוותיך, וקרבתם בכל עבודתך, ושמך הגדול והקדוש, עלינו קראת. ותיתן לנו, אדוני אלוהינו באהבה, מועדים לשמחה, חגים וזמנים לששון, את יום חג הסוכות הזה. זמן שמחתנו מקרא קודש זכר ליציאת מצרים, ומפני חטאינו גלינו מארצנו, ונתרחקנו מעל אדמתנו, ואנחנו יכולים לעלות ולהיראות ולהשתחוות לפניך, לעשות חובתנו בבית בחירתך, בבית הגדול והקדוש שנקרא שמך עליו, מפני היה שנשתלך במקדשך. יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, מלך רחמן, שתשיב ותרחם עלינו ויהיה בקדשך ורחמך הרבים, ותבנהו מהרה ותגדל כבודו. אבינו מלכנו, גלי כבוד מלכותך עלינו מהרה, ועופר ונעשה לנו לעיני כל חי, וקרב אזורנו מבין הגויים, ונפוצותינו כנס מירכתי הארץ, ואבינו לציון עירך ברחם, ולירושלים בית מקדשך בשמחת עולם, ושם נעשה לפניך כבוד כבודתנו, תמיד כסדרם מוספים כהלכתם, את מוסף יום חג הסוכות הזה, נעשה ונקריב לפניך באהבה כמצוות רצונך, כמו שכתבת לנו בתורתך, על ידי משה עבדך בפיך ובנך כאמור, וב15 יום לחודש השביעי מקרא קודש יהיה לכם, כל מלאכת עבודה לא תעשו, וחגותם חג לאדוני 7 ימים, והקרבתם עולה איש ירק נכוח אדוני, הרים בדבר 13 אלים שניים, כבשים בני שנה 14 תמימים יהיו, ומנחם ונזכם כי בראש 13 לפר, 12 לאיים, וסרון לקבע סוין כדיסקו, וסייל לכפר 2 תמימים כהלכתם. אלוהינו ואלוהותינו, מלך רחמן, רחם עלינו, טוב ומיטיב הידש לנו, שוב עלינו בהרום רחמך, בגלל אבות שעשו רצונך, בני ביתך כבתחילה. וכוני מקדשך מכונו, והרינו בבין יהנו, ושמחנו בתיקונו, וישב כהנים לעבודתם ולווים לשירם ולזמרם, וישב ישראל לנביהם, ושם נעלה ונערב ונשתחווה לפניך, ושלוש פעמי ירק עלינו כך כתוב בתורתך, 3 פעמים בשנה יראה כל זכורך בני אדוני אלוהיך במקום אשר יבחר, בחג המצות. ובחג השבועות ובחג הסוכות, ולא יראה פני אדוני ריקם, איש כמנת ידו, כברכת אדוני אלוהיך אשר נתן לך. והשיאנו אדוני אלוהינו, את ברכת מועדך לחיים ולשלום ושמחה וששון, כאשר רצית. ואמרת לברכנו, אלוהינו ואלוהותינו, קדשנו במצוותיך, ותחוקנו בתורתך, שמנו בטובך ושמחנו בשבועתך, וטהר ליבנו, לעבדך בימה והנחיל לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, בשמחה וששון בעודי קודשך, וישמחו בך ישראל מקדשי שמך, ברוך אתה אדוני. מקדש ישראל והזמנים. רצה, אדוני אלוהינו ביום חג ישראל בתפילתם, וישב והעבר לביתך, ואישי ישראל בתפילם ויעמד לקבל ברצון, ותהי רצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך. בתי הרעב לפניך, תיראתנו כעולה וקרבן, הנערכים ברחמך הרעים תחשב שכנת ציון יראך, וסרה עברה לירושלים, ותחזנה Einenu, Beshiva Khalet Siyam Berachamim, Besham Navod Kabirakim Elam Ushanim Kad Mariyah, Baruch Ataranai, Sheot Khalevad Kabiranavod, Modim Anachnu Lach, Shetaranai. Hatov, kilo chalaracham bechel rokem kilo tamu chasadechem elam kividu lach v'yahal kulam yibaraki bram shimcha malkenu tamid leolam voed v'chol hachem yerucha sela v'yeloishim chabeamed hayeshur nezortenu sela baruch ata Adonai hatoshim chaulachana lehodar Kohanim. Amen. Yevarechecha Adonai. V'yishmerecha Yahweh Adonai Panav Elecha Amen. Yisah Adonai Panav Elecha V'yasem Lecha Sing shalom to Barucha, Ken Bachesed Rachamim, Alani V'Klois Ram Mecha, Barchen Avnik Kumanik Kabir Panecha, Kivrabanach Natata Laru, Arnalet Ratchaim V'Vat Chesed, Ustakav Racha, Uvrachaim V'Chaim V'Shalom, V'Tov B'Einecha, L'Vrechen Amachais V'Chol Shabi Shlomecha, Baruch Atah Adonai, Ham Barechen Amo Yisrael, V'Shalom. Gary. I'm on page 362, so it's a different book.
Okay, gotcha. 382.
Something like that, yeah.
So now we get ready for the Hoshanot, as Rabbi Morgan beautifully explained. We will stay standing as the ark is open. Just for safety, we were just going to have the clergy make the actual Hoshanot. So please stay at your seats, but please do take your lulav and etrog out, and you can certainly feel the presence of the Hoshanot from your seats.
Take a tour.
Page 383.
Whatever tour you want. Hoshana, Hoshana, lemancha Eloheinu, Hoshana, Hoshana. No, you stay here. Hoshana, Hoshana, lemancha Boreinu, Hoshana, 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 Hoshana lemancha go aleinu. Hoshana, 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 lemancha doshenu. Hoshana, 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 leman amitach. Hoshana, 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 leman beritach. Hoshana, Hoshana, Hoshana leman godlach v'tifartach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman datach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman hodach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman v'udach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman zichrach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman chastach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman tuvach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman yechidach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman kevodach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman lemudach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman malchutach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman nitzchach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman sodach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman uzach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman peirach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman tzidkatach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman kedushatach. Hoshana, Hoshana leman rachamecha harabim. Hoshana, 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 leman shechinatach. Hoshana, 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 leman tehilatach. Hoshana, Hoshana, Aniva Hoshiana, Hoshana. Aniva Hoshiana, Hoshia Vedamecha, Uvarech and Nachlatecha, Orem, 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 Venasem, Orem, Venasem, Adolam, Hoshia Vedamecha, Uvarech and Nachlatecha, Orem, 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 Venasem, Orem, Venasem, Adolam, you the one I love. Laman dar kol amei haaretz ki anahu Elohim eino. Yep, put the Torah back. is the ark. Yet Gadol v'yet Kadash Shemei Rabba Ve'olam Madiv Rachirute Ve'yamlich Machute Ve'chayei Chon U'vyamei U've'chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael Ba'gala U'vizman Kariv Ve'imeru Amen Yehesh Mei Rabba Mevarach Le'olam u'lam me'omaya Yitbarach ve'yishtabach V'yitbar ve'yitromam ve'yitnaseh V'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shemei dekudesh abrechu Le'elah Min kol birchata Ve'shirata tushbechata Ve'nechemata Damiram ve'oma ve'imru Amen Titkabel Salodhon, Uvahudhon, the Chol Yisrael, Akodam Avuhon, Tvishmaya Ve'imru Amen, Yeshlam Araba Min Shemaya, V'chayim Aleinu V'yakol, V'yakol Yisrael, Ve'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom B'Romav, Oh, Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael Ve'imeru Amen. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadoneinu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu, Mi Keloheinu, Mi Kadoneinu, Mi Kemalkeinu, Kemalkeinu, Mi Kemoshienu. No del Eloheinu, no del Adoneinu, no del Malkeinu, Malkeinu, no del Moshienu. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adoneinu, Baruch Malkeinu, Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adoneinu, Atahu Malkeinu, Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. Atahu Shehiktiru Avoteinu Lefanecha et Ketoret Hasamim et Ketoret Hasamim Aravezaram Mechanim Natamim Chamim Rabim Shalom. Atikanabanich Alabonayich Lamana Chaverei, Lamana Chaverei, Lamana Chaverei, Adabra Nashalom Bach, Laman Beit Adonai Eloheinu, Avaksha Tov Lach, Adonai Ohoz Le'amo Yitein, Adonai Yevarech et Amo Vashalom. Kaddish Rabbanon, Yet Gadal v'Yet Kadash Shemei Rabbah, V'Alma Divrach Erutei v'Yamlich Malchutei. V'chayechon v'yamechon, v'chayedechon Beit Yisrael, v'agala v'izman kari v'yamru amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevarach, le'olam v'lam e'amaya. Yet barach v'yishtabach, v'yet pa'ar, v'yet romam, v'yet naseh. V'yet hadar, v'yet aleh, v'yet halal. Shemei dekudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tosh b'chata v'nechemata. Da amiran v'olma v'yemru amen. Al Yisrael v'Rabbanan v'al Tamidehon. V'al kol Tamidehon. V'al kol man de'oskin v'oraita. Divyatra hadein v'divacholata v'atar. Yehelahon ulachon shlama rabba. China v'chista v'rachamin. V'chayina richinim uzon amri v'cha. U'furkona mikodam avahon devishmaya v'yemru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim tovim. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yemru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'bromav, u'barachamav ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yemru amen. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol, lateit gedula l'yotze breshit.
Please rise.
Shelo asanu kegoye haratzot, velo samanu kamish bechora hadama. Shelo sam chelkenu kahem, v'gahor aleinu kechol hamonam. V'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'madim. Lifnei melech, Malchei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shehu Noteh Shamayim v'Yoser Haaretz, U'moshav Yekaro b'Shamayim Mima'al, U'Shchinatu Zo, V'Gov Hei Meromim, Hu Eloheinu Ein, Odem Bet Malkeinu Efes Ulato, Ka Katuv, Betorat